At school, a girl is openly laughed at when she announces to the whole class that her mom is a world champion fighter. The teacher interrupts her and demands that she stop making things up. But a few minutes later, the classroom door swings open and a woman the whole world recognizes enters the room. The morning fog still clung to the narrow streets of their new neighborhood as La Aia stared through the car window, watching unfamiliar houses pass by. Her mother's SUV hummed steadily along the quiet road lined with perfectly trimmed hedges and identical mailboxes. Everything in this part of town looked too neat, too staged, as though someone had carefully laid out a model village to impress a committee of strangers. The streets were wide and clean, the houses pale and polished. Birds chirped over the dull murmur of sprinklers. It all felt like a different world from where they had come. A quieter world, a safer one, her mother had promised. La Aya sat with her backpack on her lap, her small hands gripping the straps tightly. Inside was a neatly packed pencil case, a new composition notebook, and her lunchbox, items she had carefully organized the night before, just as her mom had taught her. This was her first day at Hawthorne Academy, a private school known for its rigorous academics and long waiting list. It wasn't the kind of place where kids like her typically ended up. But her mom had insisted this was where she needed to be now. Somewhere no one would know her. Somewhere she could just be a kid. "We're almost there, sweetheart," her mother said gently, glancing over with a tight smile. Ronda Rousey, the woman the world knew as a fighter, a champion, a symbol of unshakable will, looked every bit the regular mom this morning. Her hair was tied back in a ponytail. She wore a plain hoodie, and her eyes were soft with concern. "You remember what we talked about?" La nodded, though her stomach was turning. "Keep my head up. Be polite. Don't let anyone push me around. That's my girl." Rhonda reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "You don't have to prove anything to anybody today. Just be yourself. That's enough." They pulled up to the circular drive in front of the school. A tall white building with red brick accents and ivy climbing the walls stood under a pale blue sky. Children in uniforms clustered near the steps, laughing and chatting in small groups. Parents and sleek cars dropped off their kids and barely looked up from their phones. La swallowed hard as she stepped out. She wore the school's required uniform, a navy skirt, white blouse, and blazer, but somehow she still felt different. Not just new, out of place. She waved goodbye to her mother and forced herself to walk up the steps, her spine stiff with the effort not to turn around. The school smelled like floor wax and old books. A receptionist with thin glasses greeted her with a rehearsed smile and handed her a laminated map of the school and her schedule. Homeroom was in room 204 with Mrs. Breener. She found the room after taking 2 wrong turns and walked in a few minutes before the bell. The classroom was bright and orderly. Desks stood in neat rows and motivational posters lined the walls. A few students already sat chatting in low voices. None of them looked up when she entered. Mrs. Breener, a tall woman with tight curls and a clipboard in hand, gave her a nod and motioned toward the back of the room. "You must be La. Welcome," she said without much warmth. La gave a small nod and took the seat assigned to her. The girl beside her shifted her chair away slightly. The boy behind her whispered something and chuckled, but she didn't turn around to hear what he'd said. The day passed slowly. The classes were harder than she expected, not because she didn't understand the material, she did, but because everything felt tense. No one talked to her except when required. When she raised her hand to answer a question, Mrs. Breener barely acknowledged her. During lunch, she sat at the end of a long table where no one joined her. Her lunch, chicken and rice in a thermos, smelled different from the sandwiches and juice boxes everyone else seemed to have. By the end of the week, she had memorized the map of the school, knew all her teachers' names, and still hadn't made a single friend. The other kids traveled in packs, talked about things she didn't understand, family vacations in Greece, tennis camps, and which luxury SUV their parents drove. One girl complimented another's shoes by asking if they were the limited edition designer ones that had sold out in 20 minutes online. La wore plain black flats from a discount store. She kept her eyes down. She didn't talk much about school at home. When Rhonda asked, La said it was fine. She didn't want to seem weak. Not in front of her mom. Her mom had fought real battles. Blood, bruises, broken bones. La couldn't complain about a few cold shoulders and awkward stares. But every night, she stayed up a little later than she should, drawing in her notebook or reading old fight magazines she wasn't supposed to have. She clipped pictures of her mom in the ring, not just the glamorous ones with victory poses, but the raw shots, sweaty, focused, unflinching. Her mom had always told her the real strength is staying true to yourself when it would be easier to fade into the background. One afternoon in early October, Mrs. Breener announced a new assignment. "We'll be doing a project called The Family Heroes," she said, writing the title on the board in large, swirling letters. "Each of you will prepare a short presentation about someone in your family you admire. It can be a parent, a grandparent, even a sibling. Think about what they do, what they've accomplished, and what they've taught you. This is your chance to share your story." A murmur of excitement swept through the class. Some kids immediately began whispering to each other. La stared at the board, her stomach tightening. She didn't need to think hard about who her hero was. That had always been clear, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to say it out loud. At home that night, she sat on the living room floor sorting through a shoebox full of keepsakes, photos of her mom in training, medals, old clippings from sports magazines. Rhonda walked in and saw the box open, the contents spread around like puzzle pieces. "You thinking about the project?" her mom asked. La nodded slowly. "Everyone else is going to talk about doctors, lawyers, or, I don't know, people who run companies. Not fighters." Rhonda sat beside her, cross-legged on the rug. She picked up a photo, one of her younger self with a busted lip holding a gold belt high above her head. "You don't have to talk about me if you don't want to. You can pick someone else. I won't be offended. But you're my hero," La said quietly. "You always have been." Rhonda smiled and her eyes softened. "Then don't let them take that from you. If they don't understand, that's on them, not you." They spent the evening building a presentation together. La chose 5 photos, her mom on the Olympic podium, inside the cage during her UFC debut, holding her when she was just a baby, and 2 others that captured quiet, behind-the-scenes moments, lacing up her gloves, comforting a young fan backstage. They printed captions, wrote a speech, and even found a replica of one of her mom's old medals to bring in. Rhonda let her borrow it under strict instructions to guard it with her life. In the days leading up to the presentations, La rehearsed her speech in her room. She practiced in front of the mirror, trying to speak clearly and with confidence. She knew her story was different, but it was real. Her mom had fought for everything they had, not just in the ring, but in life. She had come from nothing and made a name for herself on her own terms. That was something to admire. That was something to be proud of. But the night before the presentation, doubt crept in. What if no one believed her? What if they laughed? She stared at the photos on her desk, trying to summon the same courage her mom always seemed to carry so easily. Her fingers trembled as she packed her folder and the medal into her backpack. The next morning dawned gray and cold. Her mother drove her to school in silence. As they pulled up, Rhonda turned to her. "No matter what happens in there," she said, her voice low and serious, "you're telling the truth. That matters. Don't let anyone make you feel small for it." La nodded, her lips pressed together in a thin line. She climbed out of the car, the weight of the medal heavy in her bag. Her palms were sweaty, her breath shallow, but she kept walking. She was ready to speak. She just didn't know how ready the world was to listen. The day of the presentations arrived under a crisp autumn sky. The air was tinged with the scent of turning leaves, and yellow and orange crowns rustled above the narrow courtyard where the students usually gathered before the morning bell. But on this particular Friday, the courtyard was nearly empty. Instead, most of the students and parents crowded into the school auditorium, a clean, well-lit space lined with maroon velvet curtains and framed photos of past academic teams and performing arts productions. There was a light buzz of anticipation in the air. The Family Heroes Assembly was a well-known tradition at Hawthorne Academy, and parents were encouraged to attend and support their children as they spoke about the people they admired most. It was meant to be a celebration of character, courage, and connection. But for Law, it felt like an invisible test. She stood backstage with the other students, clutching her manila folder tightly against her chest. Her fingers traced the edges of the photos inside, her mother beaming in victory, crouching to wrap her arms around a sobbing young fan, gripping the ropes of the cage after a grueling title defense. Each image was more than a picture. It was a piece of their life, of her truth. And yet in this moment they felt like a fragile shield she wasn't sure would hold up when she stepped into the light. Mrs. Breener stood near the podium, clipboard in hand, giving final instructions to the student speakers. She didn't look at Law as she spoke, but her words cut clear and cold. Remember, everyone, keep it factual. This isn't a place for fairy tales or exaggerations. We want to hear real stories from real lives. Law swallowed hard, her heart pounding against her ribs, fast and nervous. She tried to remind herself of her mother's words. You're telling the truth. That matters. Don't let anyone make you feel small for it. The assembly began with a cheerful welcome from the principal, who made a few jokes about how proud the school was to see the next generation of leaders honoring those who shaped them. Then the presentations started. One by one, students stepped onto the stage, each greeted with polite applause. A boy named Trevor spoke proudly of his grandfather, a retired aerospace engineer who had worked on satellite systems. A girl named Ava beamed as she described her mother, a pediatric surgeon who saved babies' lives. Another student shared stories of her father, a tech entrepreneur who'd launched a successful app during the pandemic. The room responded warmly to each tale, clapping and smiling as the proud parents stood for recognition. When Mrs. Breener called Law's name, a small ripple of whispering passed through the student section. Law felt her spine straighten as she stepped onto the stage, her shoes clicking softly against the polished wood. The auditorium lights made it hard to see the crowd, but she could feel all the eyes on her, their weight heavy, questioning, already doubting. She took a breath, adjusted the microphone with trembling fingers, and began to speak. My name is Law Rousey Brown, and the person I admire most in my family is my mom. There was a slight pause, a few heads tilted. She's not a lawyer or a doctor. She doesn't work in an office or run a company. She's a fighter, a real one, a world champion. She's taught me more about strength and courage than anyone I've ever met. She reached into her folder and pulled out the first photo, holding it up so the audience could see. Her voice grew steadier. This is my mom at the Olympics. She won a bronze medal in judo when she was just a teenager. She trained every day, even when she was sick. Even when people told her she wouldn't make it, she didn't give up. She showed the second photo, her mother in the UFC cage, hand raised in victory, sweat streaking her face, eyes fierce with determination. She became the first ever women's champion in the UFC. People told her women didn't belong in that sport. They said it was too violent, too brutal. She proved them wrong. She showed the world what women are capable of. The room was quiet, too quiet. No one was clapping like they had for the other students. Law pressed on. She also teaches me things at home, how to be brave, how to stand up for myself, how to stay true to who I am even when it's hard. She tells me that real strength isn't about muscles, it's about heart. She lifted the replica medal from her bag and held it high. She gave me this to remind me that winning isn't always about trophies. It's about surviving, about showing up even when you're scared. Her voice trembled slightly at the last sentence, but she held her ground. She looked out over the auditorium, scanning for any sign of reaction. A few faces looked puzzled. Some students exchanged glances. A group of girls in the third row stifled giggles. Then Mrs. Breener stepped up beside her. She placed a hand on the microphone and offered La a polite, almost condescending smile. "Thank you, La. That was creative," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "Though next time, let's try to keep our stories grounded in reality. This is about real family heroes, not celebrities or fictional tales." The words landed like a slap. A hush fell over the auditorium, followed by a wave of snickering. Someone in the student section whispered loudly, "Who does she think she is?" Another voice said, "Maybe she got confused and meant someone from a movie." La felt her chest tighten. Her hands trembled. She tried to speak to protest, but Mrs. Breener was already guiding her off the stage. "That's enough, dear. Let's not get carried away." Back in her seat, La sat frozen. Her eyes burned. The metal in her lap felt like a weight she could barely hold. She heard the whispers around her, felt the stares. Her name popped up in the class group chat moments later, followed by an edited photo of her mother's face pasted onto a comic book hero's body with the caption, "When fiction becomes delusion." Another message read, "Next time, try someone real." She didn't cry. Not yet. But something inside her curled up tight like a flower shrinking away from the cold. After the assembly, she walked through the halls like a ghost. No one spoke to her. A few students pointed and laughed. One girl imitated her speech in a mocking tone as she passed by. That afternoon, she barely spoke on the ride home. Rhonda asked how it went, but La only shrugged and said it was fine. She couldn't bring herself to tell her mother what had happened. Not because she was afraid of her reaction, but because she didn't want her mom to feel hurt. She didn't want her to know that the world still refused to believe in her, even through her daughter's eyes. That night, she sat in bed staring at the ceiling. The photos from her presentation spread across her blanket. Her mother knocked softly and stepped inside. "You okay?" La nodded. "Want to talk about it?" She hesitated, then shook her head. Rhonda sat on the edge of the bed and gently touched her daughter's shoulder. "You don't have to say anything if you're not ready," she said softly. "But just know whatever happened today, whatever they said, it doesn't change who you are or who I am or what we've been through." La nodded again, her eyes stinging with the tears she refused to let fall. She rolled over and pulled the blanket to her chin, silent and still. When the door closed behind her mother, she let the tears come. Not loud, not messy, just quiet and steady like rain on a roof. The next few days were no better. In class, Mrs. Breener ignored her completely. In the cafeteria, the mocking continued in hushed tones. Online, her classmates shared memes and jokes at her expense. Some parents even commented on the school's private social network, saying they were concerned about the kind of values some children were being taught at home. And still, La said nothing. She carried the weight of humiliation like armor. She walked through each day with her chin up, her eyes forward, her fists clenched tight at her sides. She didn't lash out. She didn't cry in public. But she felt something inside her start to shift. Something slow and deep, like the rumble before an earthquake. She was tired of hiding, tired of pretending, tired of being told that her truth didn't belong. She didn't know what would happen next. But she knew one thing. She wasn't done. Not yet. For days, La drifted through school as though she were suspended in glass, moving but untouched, visible but unreachable. The humiliation from her presentation clung to her like a second skin. Everywhere she turned, she felt the weight of stares, the prick of whispered jokes, and the silence of teachers who looked right through her. Even those who weren't openly cruel responded with indifference, the kind that cut deeper than words. They had already placed her in a box, fantasist, exaggerator, liar, and in a place like Hawthorne, once the lid was closed, it rarely opened again. But at home, the energy was different. Her mother hadn't pressed her for details, but she had seen the change, how La spoke less, smiled less, moved with the subtle tightness of someone trying not to draw attention to herself. Rhonda didn't ask. She observed, and she waited. That was her way. She never forced her daughter to share, but she knew when to lean in, when to offer space, and when to act. What Law didn't know was that weeks earlier, Rhonda had received a call from the school principal, Mr. Keene, inviting her to be a surprise guest speaker at the Family Heroes event. It had been his idea to end the assembly with the powerful figure whose story could inspire the students. Rhonda had hesitated. She didn't crave public stages anymore, not like she used to. Her days of chasing headlines were behind her. But when he'd mentioned it was about showing students the many forms strength could take, she agreed on one condition: her name wouldn't be announced. She wanted it to be a genuine moment, not a photo op. Mr. Keene had kept his promise. The day of the final assembly arrived under a gray sky. A brisk wind stirred the red and gold leaves across the campus, sweeping them into corners like forgotten notes. Inside the auditorium, the atmosphere was stiff and ceremonial. The student body had gathered again, this time joined by more teachers and a handful of parents who hadn't been able to attend the earlier presentations. The event was framed as a wrap-up celebration, a chance to reflect on the meaning of family, courage, and contribution. Law sat in the audience, her shoulders hunched slightly, her eyes focused on a point just below the stage. She had considered pretending to be sick to avoid the event altogether, but something in her refused to give the school or anyone in it the satisfaction of her absence. She would sit, endure, and disappear again. That was the plan. Mrs. Breener stood at the podium, perfectly composed as always. She wore a navy blazer with a silk scarf knotted at her throat and held her clipboard like a badge of certainty. Her voice, crisp and confident, echoed off the auditorium walls. We want to thank all of our students who participated in the Family Heroes project this year. Your presentations reminded us of the many forms leadership can take. From the sciences to the arts to community service, we've heard from children of physicians, engineers, entrepreneurs. You've all made your families proud. There was polite applause, scattered and formal. She paused, her eyes skimming the audience until they landed on Law's section. Her smile tightened and she added, and of course, we had some imaginative contributions as well. While we encourage creativity, we also want to remind our students of the importance of distinguishing between aspiration and reality. A few students chuckled. Someone near the back whispered something that earned another round of stifled laughter. Law's cheeks burned. She looked down at her lap, fingers curled into fists. Mrs. Breener turned back to the microphone. Now, before we conclude, Principal Keene has arranged a special guest, a parent from our community whose story embodies strength, resilience, and personal growth. I'm sure we'll all find it enlightening. She stepped aside. For a moment, the room was still. Then the double doors at the rear of the auditorium opened with a quiet click. Rhonda Rousey walked in. She moved with the easy, grounded grace of someone who had learned to carry herself through storms. She wore simple jeans, a dark green jacket, and her hair was pulled back into a loose braid. No entourage, no spotlight. Just presence, solid, undeniable. The auditorium froze. Students turned in their seats. Parents leaned forward. Teachers stared. A low murmur ran through the crowd like a wave of recognition catching speed. Mrs. Breener's smile faltered. Principal Keene met Rhonda near the side of the stage and handed her the mic. He looked both pleased and faintly nervous, sensing the shift in the air. "Thank you all for having me," Rhonda began, her voice calm and direct. "I wasn't sure if I was going to speak today. I'm not used to rooms like this anymore. I used to stand in rings, not auditoriums. But when Mr. Keene asked me to share my story, I thought of my daughter. I thought about what it means to show up, especially when it's uncomfortable." She paused, scanning the room slowly. Her eyes landed on Law just for a second. The girl looked up, startled. Their eyes met, and something changed. "I started my journey in sports when I was a kid. I lost more matches than I won. I cried in locker rooms, puked before competitions, doubted myself 100 times over. People told me I wasn't strong enough, that I wasn't cut out for it, that girls didn't belong in combat sports. I didn't listen. She let the silence linger, the weight of her words pressing gently on the room. I became the first American woman to medal in judo at the Olympics. Later, I became the first female champion in the UFC. Not because I was special, but because I showed up when it was hard, because I kept going when everyone told me to stop, and because I had people who believed in me, even when the world didn't. She looked around again. My daughter gave a presentation this week. She told the truth. She spoke from her heart. And some people thought her story was too wild to be real, too extraordinary to be true. But the truth is, the most extraordinary people often walk right past us without us knowing who they are. They sit beside us in class. They stand in line behind us at the store. They look like everyone else until the moment they stand up. A hush fell across the room. La stood up. She told her truth. And I'm here to tell you every word she said was real. I'm her mother. I'm the fighter in those photos. And I couldn't be more proud. The silence shattered into applause. Not scattered, but thunderous. Not polite, but alive. La sat frozen for a moment. Then slowly something unfurled in her chest. Her hands relaxed, her breath deepened. She looked around and saw for the first time eyes that weren't mocking her. They were wide with surprise, yes, but also respect. Rhonda stepped off the stage. Students leaned to one another in shock. Parents whispered. Teachers exchanged stunned glances. Mrs. Breener's face was pale, her smile rigid. Principal Keene returned to the microphone, his tone careful but sincere. Thank you, Miss Rousey. That was powerful and an important reminder that strength doesn't always look the way we expect. That concludes today's assembly. Students, please return to your homerooms. The room began to stir, but no one rushed to leave. Conversations broke out in clusters. Several students turned to La, curiosity now replacing dismissal. A girl named Eliza approached her hesitantly. Hey, was that really your mom? La nodded, her voice quiet but clear. Yeah, she's awesome. And, just like that, something small but irreversible shifted. Hallway chatter that afternoon was different. Her name still came up, but not in the same tone. Instead of mocking, there was awe. Disbelief had become intrigue. The same classmates who had rolled their eyes at her story now replayed it like gossip, marveling that they had a real champion's daughter sitting among them. That evening at home, La stood by the front window as the sky darkened into lavender and slate. Her mother sat at the kitchen counter peeling an orange. Why didn't you tell me you were coming today? La asked finally. I figured you had enough to worry about, Rhonda said with a smile. Besides, I wanted to make sure you saw it first, that it was real, that you weren't crazy for believing in yourself. La walked over and wrapped her arms around her mother's waist. For a long time, neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. The next morning at school, things felt unfamiliar in a new way. Not hostile, just different. She still sat at the edge of the cafeteria, but this time someone asked if they could sit with her, then another. During gym class, one of the girls who had laughed during her presentation asked almost shyly, Does your mom teach you to fight? La nodded a little. You think you could show me sometime? She paused, then said, Maybe. By the end of the week, Rhonda received an email from Principal Keene. A few students inspired by her visit had expressed interest in learning more about martial arts and self-defense. Would she consider helping the school start an after-school confidence and fitness program? She forwarded the email to La with a single line. Your move, champ. La sat with it for a long time. Then she began to write a reply. The air in the small converted barn behind their house carried the crisp, earthy scent of old wood, worn leather, and dust stirred by movement. Shafts of golden afternoon sunlight filtered through the high windows, illuminating floating moats as La stood barefoot in the center of the matted floor. Her stance was wide, her knees bent slightly, her fists raised. Across from her, Rhonda circled with a quiet intensity, arms folded, observing. No words, just the sound of their breath and the occasional creak of the beams above. It had been 4 days since the assembly, 4 days since everything shifted. La still wasn't entirely sure how to process it. At school, the whispers hadn't vanished, but they had softened. The mockery had curdled into curiosity, and though no apologies were spoken outright, the subtle changes spoke louder. An offered seat in the cafeteria, a shared pencil in class, a nod of acknowledgement in the hallway. The same students who had laughed at her were now watching her with different eyes. But it wasn't validation she was chasing anymore. Something had woken inside her. Not anger exactly, though it had started that way. Not pride either. It was something deeper, something steadier, a need to find out who she really was when no one else was looking. And she knew there was only one way to do that. She'd asked her mother to train her. Not just to teach her a few moves or give her something to do after school, but to train her for real, the way fighters trained, the way champions were made. Rhonda had stared at her for a long moment after the request, then simply said, "Okay. We start tomorrow." Now, as La dropped into a deeper squat, her muscles already trembling from the endless repetitions, she understood what that okay had truly meant. It wasn't just punching. It wasn't even fighting. It was showing up every day. It was hurting and going on. It was not getting out of the work just because you were tired or scared or embarrassed. It was pushing through discomfort until discomfort was normal. And Rhonda, for all her warmth as a mother, did not hold back as a trainer. She corrected La's stance without hesitation. She made her start drills over if they weren't clean. She pushed her through combinations again and again until her lungs burned and her legs threatened to fold. And yet, she never raised her voice, never shamed her, never made her feel like she wasn't good enough. She was simply relentless. And La found to her surprise that she liked it. She liked the structure, the clarity, the way the sweat poured away everything else, the doubts, the stares, the old echoes of laughter. By the end of the first week, her hands ached, her thighs were sore, and her body carried the dull, delicious hum of effort. She had bruises blooming like small galaxies on her arms and shins. She had trouble walking up the stairs without groaning. But she also had something else, a growing fire in her chest. Then, on the second Monday after the assembly, she was warming up in the barn when she heard a voice at the door. "Hey, is this, open to anyone?" She turned to see a familiar figure. Zoe Mathis, the same girl who had once loudly mimicked her presentation in the hallway, now standing awkwardly in the doorway, her hair in a messy ponytail, a backpack slung over one shoulder. La stared, unsure how to answer. Zoe cleared her throat and shrugged. "I know I was kind of a jerk before." "Okay, a lot of a jerk. But what your mom said, it stuck. And what you did, standing up there like that. I don't know. I just thought maybe if you're still doing this stuff, maybe I could try." La hesitated for a breath, then glanced at her mom, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod from the side of the barn. "Yeah," La said finally. "You can try." That afternoon, the drills doubled. Rhonda pushed them harder, paired them together, and introduced partner exercises, timing, coordination, reaction. Zoe was clumsy, impatient, quick to whine when something hurt. But she didn't quit. Not even when she slipped and landed hard on her side, breath knocked out of her. She got up, red-faced, and kept going. And La respected that more than any apology. By the end of the week, 2 more girls joined. Emily, soft-spoken and wide-eyed, and Sanaa, the daughter of a local restaurant owner. Soon, the little barn began to feel like a refuge. A place where no one cared who your parents were or what you wore or what lunch you brought, only how hard you were willing to work. They called it the Confidence Club, half-jokingly at first, but it stuck. Rhonda adjusted her schedule to be there every day after school. She guided, she demonstrated, she motivated. She didn't just teach them how to punch. She taught them how to stand, how to breathe, how to look someone in the eye and hold their own. And slowly, Law began to change. At school, she walked taller. When someone whispered, she didn't flinch. When Mrs. Breener looked at her with that cold, distant expression, she looked back without blinking. But it was what happened a week later that truly marked the next step. Rhonda came into the barn one afternoon holding an envelope. "This came from Coach Vance," she said, handing it to Law. Law opened it slowly. Her eyes scanned the words once, twice, then a third time. It was an invitation to the local youth jiu-jitsu tournament, one of the largest in the region. Girls from across the state would compete. There were team events, solo divisions, age brackets. The entry form was tucked inside. "They want me to compete?" she asked. Rhonda gave a small smile. "I may have shown them some footage and mentioned your work ethic." Law stared at the form. "It's optional," her mother added. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Not me, not them. But if you want it, if you really want it, we'll start preparing differently." More seriously, Law looked up. Her voice was quiet, but sure. "I want to do it." The next day, she told Zoe, and to her surprise, Zoe grinned. "Funny timing. I was just about to ask if we could sign up for the team sparring division. You want to compete too?" "I want to try. With you. If you'll let me." Law hesitated, then nodded. "Let's do it." Training changed after that. It wasn't just hard, it was intense. Timed drills, conditioning circuits, strategy breakdowns. Rhonda became sharper, more precise, correcting the smallest missteps, pushing them through walls of fatigue and frustration. And they responded. Every day they showed up, bruised, exhausted, but present. The barn transformed into a dojo. The mats were worn, but sacred. The bags in the corner swayed from endless strikes, and over it all was Rhonda's voice, calm, firm, constant. And in the spaces between the sweat and soreness, a bond formed. Law and Zoe, once adversaries, now moved in tandem, anticipating each other's moves, catching each other when they fell, laughing between rounds like they'd always been a team. On one especially grueling day, they both collapsed to the mat after a punishing drill. Law groaned, wiping sweat from her forehead. "I think I left my legs back in round 3, she muttered. Zoe laughed breathlessly. "Tell your legs mine say hi." They left after the warm-up. They lay there side by side, staring at the high beams above, breathing in the dust and silence. From the doorway, Rhonda watched, arms folded, her expression unreadable. She saw what they didn't yet see, how they'd grown, not just in strength, but in presence. How they carried themselves now without apology. How they held space, not because it was given, but because they'd earned it. Later that evening, Law sat on the porch, legs aching, arms limp, the invitation form still folded in her hoodie pocket. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and dirt. Her mother stepped out, 2 cups of tea in hand. She handed one to her daughter and sat beside her. "You ready for this?" Law stared out into the growing dusk. "I don't know," she said truthfully. "But I want it." Rhonda nodded. "Then we'll get you ready." She sipped her tea and added almost absently, "Just remember, this isn't about beating anyone else. It's about meeting yourself in the hardest moment and not looking away." Law didn't answer, but deep down she understood. She was no longer training to silence the laughter or win approval, or even to prove who her mother was. She was training to meet herself. And for the first time in her life, she was beginning to believe she was worth meeting. The morning of the tournament dawned with a quiet, electric tension in the air. A low layer of fog blanketed the hills, softening the edges of the world and muting the familiar landscape that rolled past the car windows. Law sat in the back seat beside Zoe, both dressed in matching white GIs with their belts tied tightly around their waists. Neither girl spoke much during the drive. There was no need. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was heavy with focus, breath, and memory, each thought looping back to the hours spent on the mats in the barn, the bruises earned like badges, the pain worn like armor. Rhonda drove without music, her gaze steady on the road, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on her thigh. She didn't speak either. Her presence was grounding enough. She had trained them for this moment, built them piece by piece into something stronger than they'd been before. There was nothing left to say. They arrived at the sports complex early, the parking lot already filling with vans and buses bearing logos of different schools and martial arts academies. Inside, the air buzzed with the murmur of coaches, the screech of sneakers on polished floors, and the distant calls of organizers over loudspeakers. Folding chairs lined the perimeter of the mats, parents clutching coffees and cameras, while competitors warmed up in small groups, practicing takedowns and shadow drills with flickers of nervous energy. La and Zoe checked in, received their division assignments, and moved to the designated warm-up area. Their division, girls aged 10 to 12, intermediate level, was large, filled with lean, sharp-eyed competitors from all over the state. Some wore pristine uniforms with embroidered academy logos. Others bounced on the balls of their feet with seasoned confidence. No one paid them much attention. That suited La just fine. They went through their warm-ups silently. Stretches, mobility drills, movement patterns. Every motion felt familiar now, her body responding with memory before thought. Her nerves buzzed at the edges of her skin, but at the center was stillness, a place carved by sweat and resolve. Their first match was in the team sparring division against two girls from a well-known club out of San Diego. The announcer called their names over the loudspeaker, and the girls stepped onto the mat, bowed, and took their places. Zoe went first, and she moved like fire, aggressive but controlled. She countered her opponent's throws with precision, her footwork crisp. When she secured her first point with a clean sweep, a burst of cheers rose from their section of the audience. Next, La stepped onto the mat. Her opponent was taller and faster, but less focused. La played defense at first, reading her movements, feeling the rhythm of her weight. Then she struck, a clean hip throw, a controlled fall, points on the board. She helped the other girl up after the buzzer, bowed, and walked off the mat without looking to the crowd. They advanced. Over the next 2 hours, they fought again and again. Each match a battle of grit and adaptation. Some were won with technique, others with sheer will. They took bruises, delivered strikes, were thrown, and got back up. And then, almost without realizing it, they stood in line for the finals. Their opponents were two girls from a top-ranked dojo in the northern part of the state. Older, stronger, and undeniably skilled. Before the match, one of them leaned close to La and muttered under her breath, "Didn't know they let charity cases in." Her partner snickered and added, "This ain't Barbie's house, honey. Hope your dreams help you float when we throw you." La didn't flinch. She didn't respond. She simply bowed and walked to her place on the mat. The first round was Zoe's. Her opponent was ruthless, fast, confident, and well-coached. Zoe held her own, but it was clear the other girl had the advantage. She took the round, and Zoe walked off the mat with a reddened cheek and a tight jaw. La stepped forward. She faced the girl who had mocked her, the one with the wide stance and the clipped smirk. The ref signaled, and the match began. It started fast, too fast. Her opponent rushed, trying to intimidate her with speed and power. La stayed calm, rooted. She absorbed the pressure, deflected attacks, and countered where she could. But then it happened. A low kick, illegal, executed just as the referee's attention turned. La felt the pain shoot through her shin like a crack of lightning. Her knee buckled. She crumpled to the mat with a sharp cry, clutching her leg. The ref turned back, saw her down, and blew the whistle, pausing the match. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Zoe ran to her side, panic on her face. "Your leg. Don't move." La shook her head, teeth gritted against the pain. Her vision swam, her breathing was shallow, but her eyes burned. She looked across the mat at her opponent, who now stood with arms crossed, waiting for the match to be called in her favor. A part of her wanted to stay down, to let it be over, to let the injury be the end. But then she heard her mother's voice. Not in her ears, but somewhere deeper, etched into her bones. You don't quit when it's hard. You fight different when it's hard. La slowly, painfully pushed herself up. She stood on one leg, the other barely touching the mat. The referee hesitated, watching her warily. I'm fine, she said hoarsely. I can continue. There was a pause. Then the whistle blew again. The crowd leaned forward. The gym went silent except for the sound of sneakers on mats and the buzz of adrenaline. Her opponent came in fast again, sensing weakness. But this time, La moved differently. She shifted her weight, used the pain as a signal, not a stop. She baited the girl in with feints, waited for the overreach, and then she struck. A spin, a pivot on the good leg. The roundhouse kick she had practiced 1,000 times, clean, swift, brutal. Her heel connected with the side of her opponent's head, snapping it sideways. The girl dropped. The gym erupted. A wave of cheers and stunned gasps surged through the air. The referee dove between them, checking the fallen competitor, then raised his hand. Victory! Zoe screamed in shock and joy, rushing to catch La as she nearly collapsed again. They hugged on the mat, breathless and weeping and laughing all at once. Around them, the crowd stood and applauded. It wasn't just a win. It was a moment. Later, as medics checked her leg and confirmed a likely fracture, someone wheeled over a chair. La refused it. She leaned on Zoe, limping one arm around her teammate's shoulders, and climbed the steps to the podium. They stood at the highest tier, gold medals placed gently around their necks. The national anthem played over the speakers. Flashbulbs popped. Coaches clapped. Parents wiped their eyes. La raised her medal into the air, her hand trembling but sure. Then she looked up. Far back in the bleachers, wearing a cap pulled low and a hoodie zipped high, Ronda Rousey stood. She didn't cheer. She didn't wave. She simply clapped, slow, firm, proud. Their eyes met, and that was all she needed. That night, back home, the house was quiet and dim. La lay on the couch with her leg propped up on pillows, wrapped in gauze and ice. Her tournament GI had been traded for oversized pajamas, but the fire in her eyes still smoldered. Ronda sat beside her, gently rubbing salve into her bruised calf. This is going to sting, she warned. La winced. You said sting, not burn through my entire soul. Ronda chuckled. You're lucky it's just your leg and not your mouth that's broken. She paused, brushing back a curl from her daughter's face. You're a little mule-headed maniac. You know that. La grinned through the ache. I learned from the best. Ronda gave her a long, quiet look. You know, she said softly, you remind me so much of your dad. That same fire, that same look in your eyes when you decide not to give up no matter what. He'd be proud of you, Liv. So damn proud. La blinked, her smile dimming into something softer. You really think so? I know so. She tapped her daughter's forehead lightly. You didn't just win today. You showed them who you are. The room fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the ticking of the old clock and the occasional hiss of wind against the windows. La's eyes began to drift shut, exhaustion pulling her toward sleep. Night, Mom, she mumbled. Night, champ, Ronda whispered, kissing her forehead. Much later, after the house had fallen into stillness, Ronda stepped out onto the porch, the stars glimmering above her like scattered glass. She crossed her arms and tilted her face toward the sky. You should have seen her, she said softly. Strong, brave, stubborn as hell, just like you. The wind stirred the trees in reply. She's got your fire, Ronda continued. But she's got something else too. She's got that light. The kind that changes people. No response came from the sky. But she didn't need one. Inside, behind her, Her daughter slept with the medal still beside her pillow, her face calm, her body bruised, and her dreams finally her own. Not as the daughter of a fighter, but as a fighter herself. Spring arrived with a quiet certainty. The frost melted from the barn roof, giving way to morning mist and the sweet scent of new growth. The afternoons grew longer, golden light stretching across the matted floors as the Confidence Club continued to grow. Some girls came with stories of being pushed aside, others with silence so deeply rooted they flinched at their own names. But inside the barn, no one had to explain. They showed who they were through effort, through breath, through the steady rhythm of fists meeting pads and feet sweeping across the mat. La became a constant. Not just a participant, not just a helper, she was someone the others looked to, someone who had once stood alone in the cafeteria and now stood at the center of something real. She didn't talk about the past much. She didn't need to. Her presence said everything, that healing doesn't always look like quiet or soft smiles, that sometimes it looks like showing up again when no one expects you to. One afternoon, a girl named Nisha arrived. She was small, with oversized sleeves and hair that swallowed half her face. She said almost nothing the first week. She did the drills, stayed on the edge, packed up early. But La noticed her hands, they were quick. Not strong, not confident, but fast and instinctive, like someone who knew how to defend herself long before learning how to strike. One day, after class, La offered her a private drill. "Just you and me," she said. 15 minutes. Nisha hesitated, then nodded. They moved together slowly at first. Basic footwork, 1-2 combos. Then La added resistance. Nisha faltered, flinched, retreated. La didn't press. She paused and said quietly, "You don't have to hit hard. You just have to stay." Nisha stayed. The next week, she spoke for the first time, just 3 words. "Thank you, La." By the 3rd month, she was leading the warm-up stretches. Every girl brought something to the barn. It became less about fighting and more about becoming. They brought snacks to share. Rhonda painted their names on the walls in chalk above where they left their shoes. A dog from the neighbor's yard started coming around during practice, curling up beside the bags like it belonged there. Someone named it Guard Dog, though it never barked. It just watched. One night, La sat with Rhonda at the dining table. The dishes were cleared, the windows opened to a breeze that carried the scent of grass and the distant chirping of frogs. Rhonda sipped tea, her elbows on the table, a tired smile on her lips. "You're not just growing, kid," she said. "You're changing the people around you." La looked at her hands. The calluses had thickened. Her knuckles were raw from bag work. But they didn't feel like battle scars. They felt earned. "I used to think I needed to prove something," she said. "Now I just want to help them see what they already have." Rhonda nodded. That's the difference between a fighter and a leader. A fighter fights for herself. A leader fights for everyone else, too. The next day, the school held its annual end-of-year showcase. Students were invited to present projects, performances, or ideas. La hadn't planned to participate, but Principal Keene reached out and asked if she would consider having the Confidence Club perform a demonstration. She hesitated. "What if people laugh again?" she asked Rhonda. "Then let them laugh," Rhonda said. "You'll still be standing at the end." They prepared a simple sequence: stance, breathing, basic defensive forms. A few throws. A few holds. Nothing flashy. Just the foundation. The truth of what they'd built. When the day came, the auditorium was full. This time, La didn't sit in the back waiting for her name. She stood at the edge of the stage with 11 other girls in matching shirts, black cotton with a simple word written across the chest: unshakable. She stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Last year, I stood here and told a story no one believed. That story was true. But I didn't come back to talk about the past. I came to show you what truth looks like when you don't run from it." The crowd was silent. Then she bowed. The others joined. And together, they began. It was quiet at first. Just the shuffle of feet, the rush of breath. But as the demonstration built, the energy shifted. It wasn't performance. It was presence. Every punch landed like a statement. Every fall like a memory rising and being let go. And when Law and Nisha closed the demo with a seamless takedown counterhold sequence, there was no giggling, no disbelief, just applause. Full, rising, sustained. In the crowd, Zoe's parents stood. So did Emily's little brother, waving from a seat too big for him. Even Mrs. Breener clapped, her face unreadable. Afterward, a line of students gathered by the stage. Some with questions. Some just to say thank you. One boy asked, "Can anyone join?" Law looked at him and smiled. "If you're ready to show up, you're already halfway there." The final week of school passed in a warm blur. Law's leg had fully healed by then, though the scar remained. She didn't hide it. She didn't hide anything anymore. On the last day, while she cleared out her locker, she found a folded note slipped through the vent. It was written in neat block letters. "I didn't believe you before. I do now. Thank you for not quitting." No name. No need. That summer, the barn stayed open. Rhonda expanded the mat space. A local carpenter offered to build cubbies. The group added Saturday classes open to siblings. Word spread. Law kept training, but now she also taught. Sometimes she sat on the steps watching the younger girls spar and felt a strange mix of joy and longing. She missed being the underdog, the outsider fighting to be seen. But she knew those days had built her. Now she was the one others watched. And she carried that weight not with pride or fear, but with purpose. One evening, as fireflies flickered along the grass line and the sound of gloves meeting pads echoed under the barn beams, Rhonda watched her daughter lead the final cool down. Law's voice was calm, steady. "Inhale. Hold it. Now exhale. Let it go." Again. Rhonda didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She just listened. To the breath. To the stillness. To the girl who had become a storm and then something more. And in the quiet afterward, as the barn emptied and the sky turned deep with stars, mother and daughter stood in the doorway, shoulder to shoulder, looking out. The wind moved gently through the trees. The world felt ready. Because so were they. So here the story ends, and if you want to watch second part, hit the subscribe button to get more videos. Thank you for watching.